Hi, I'm Barb Glessner Fines. I'm Dean and Professor of Law at the University of Missouri Kansas City School of Law, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to the first in a series of conversations with the key participants in 5 landmark school speech cases. This series is hosted by the UMKC School of Law and the John F. Tinker Foundation. Our first conversation today is with John and Mary Beth Tinker, the plaintiffs in Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District. We think that you're going to find this discussion intriguing and enlightening as our panelists discuss the events that gave rise to the case that ultimately was resolved by the United States Supreme Court in its 1969 opinion, and that has set the stage for dozens of school speech cases since then. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to turn it over now to Steve Brown of the Tinker Foundation.
And thank you very much, Dean. I sincerely appreciate that wonderful introduction, and also the involvement of the University of Missouri Kansas City School of Law and the entire university. We've had the opportunity over the years to do a lot of work together with Professor Dan Weddle, other professors at the university. So it's really an honor to be part of this whole event. This is co-sponsored by both the John F. Tinker Foundation and also the University of Missouri Kansas City. I would now like to spotlight, since that's the word we're using now, the professor of school law, the professor of law rather, at the University of Missouri Kansas City, who will give a brief overview. Before Dan Weddle does that, our very special guests today are John Tinker and also Mary Beth Tinker, and they were a few of the major plaintiffs in that court case. Christopher Eckhart, who passed away a number of years ago, who was at an event at UMKC back in 2013. I wish that Christopher would be with us today, and we're hopeful that we can put some video clips at the end of this entire event with both Christopher Eckhart and Dan Johnston, who was the then attorney for the Tinkers, who represented the ACLU. Anyway, I'm going to turn this over to Dan Weddle and ask Dan if he would just give a good overview of the Tinker case.
Okay, well, thank you, Steve. Back in 1965, as the Vietnam War was heating up, a small group of students at the Des Moines Independent Community School District decided that they would wear black armbands through the Christmas season to protest the war, or at least to commemorate those lives that were being lost in Vietnam at the time on both sides. The school found out about it somehow, and I'll let John and Mary Beth explain how that happened, but the school found out that they were going to wear these armbands, and a bunch of the principals got together and they got worried that this was going to be a disruptive event, and that it would be too controversial for the kids to handle. So they put forward a rule, enacted a rule that says you can't wear armbands. I believe is what I think it was about like that. Well, I'll let those guys tell you. So when they did show up with their armbands, they were told to take them off or be suspended, and then ultimately they were suspended at any rate. And they filed suit on the basis of free speech on the First Amendment, that their speech was improperly regulated by a state entity, the school district. The U.S. Supreme Court took the question then, was it okay for the school to punish the wearing of these armbands, and decided that the school could not prohibit their speech absent an actual or clearly foreseeable material and substantial disruption with the discipline of the school or an intrusion upon the rights of other students. And it held that because none of that took place with this protest by the Tinkers and their friends, that the school did not have the right to interfere with their free speech rights. And the big concepts that I think come out of this, one of the most famous is that teachers and students do not share their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate. However, they're not coextensive with their rights outside the schoolhouse gate because of the special characteristics of the school environment, such as the need to educate, the need to get classes, to conduct your class, et cetera. And so this material and substantial disruption standard, which was probably the one that was paid attention to most over the coming decades, said that, of course, you can't conduct school if you've got students giving speech or expressing themselves in ways that are disruptive. However, the mere fear of a disruption without more is not going to justify a school shutting down ideas to which it may object, ideas it finds too controversial, and that became the standard. And of course, that's been modified or added to in different ways over the years by the Supreme Court, and we'll be looking at those cases in the future, Supreme Court cases. So I think if I had to sum it up, I would say that schools have to protect those constitutional rights of students, and that it's right that they do so because we're preparing students for adult participation in a democratic republic. And so if the state isn't going to uphold the Constitution, then what does that tell the kids? And if the schools can suppress their First Amendment rights, we're teaching kids that when they get to be adults, that the state or federal government can suppress their constitutional rights. We'd rather teach them just the opposite, that they are American citizens, and that in this country, speech is held in a very high regard, and government is very constrained when it comes to regulating that speech.
Before we get some feedback directly from John Tinker and Mary Beth, I'm looking right now at an article, the Des Moines Tribune from December 15th, 1965. Des Moines schools ban wearing of Viet Truce armbands. And this was written by Jack Magarel. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Anyway, at the end of his article, he says, school officials believe the educational program would be disturbed by the students wearing armbands, he said. Peterson said the meeting with high school principals dealt with several other matters which school officials considered more important than a proposal by 8 or 10 students to get publicity by wearing armbands. So in light of that, and we have a number of questions, of course, that we will all ask both John and Mary Beth, but one of the questions at the outset, let me ask John first and then Mary Beth. Here we are, October, we're recording this is live and we're recording it October 20th of 2021. Would you do it again if you were in school today? John Tinker, and welcome.
Thank you, Steve. Well, that question, would I do it again? I think it's a real question. I don't think it has an easy answer. It's hard to do things where you know you're going to stick out, and you could get into trouble. And in my life, I look back at the things I've chosen to do and chosen to not do, or didn't bring myself to do. And I'm never quite sure myself which side of that I'm going to fall on. I'm glad that we did do it. It was important to me, I think, to be part of a group and not just one person. We had up to, say, a dozen students that were wanting to wear the armbands, and 5 of them actually did and got kicked out. A couple of other people did wear armbands and not get kicked out. But anyway, I hope I would do it again. That's the real answer. I hope I would do it again. And I think it's important for us to find the things that we can do to try to make the world a better place. Mary Beth, maybe I should just ask you, would you do it again?
Yes, of course I would do it again. I find that it's a life worth living. It's a very meaningful life when you speak up for the things that you care about and that you believe in. And it's a very exciting time right now for young people speaking up about all the issues that are affecting their lives, whether it is the school budgets and how the war and the military has taken money from their budgets, or whether it's the climate emergency or racism. Indigenous students, 60 were arrested last week at the Capitol in Washington, D.C., speaking up about the climate. And young people are on the move, and I would want to be part of that. And yes, of course, I would not only wear a black armband, but I would speak up about all the issues that are affecting young people today. I find that it's just, there's so many things that can get you down in the world. There's so much unfairness and injustice. But when you take action and join with others to do that, it gives you spirit and it gives you hope, and it gives life, a little more meaning and interest. So yes, of course.
Very good. Well, I'm happy to hear that. And I hope that gives everyone a little more enthusiasm and courage, because it is important, as you said. It's important that we say what we think, and that we get out there and be active in the world, and not just take it as it comes, because it doesn't come right a lot of times. The school violence, the gun violence,
Exactly.
global warming, the racial issues, and so on. All of these need attention and deserve attention. And so I'm with you, Mary Beth. I think it's important for all of us to be brave and step right up.
John, I wanted to introduce Professor David Hudson, who's professor of law at Belmont University in beautiful Nashville, Tennessee. David, we're obviously, this case is something that I know that you have always taken a great deal of interest in. We started with a kind of a brief overview of the case, but in your role today, you're going to also serve as a co-moderator. But give us your sense today of what you hear from students in law school, and then others that you talk to, in terms of the Tinker case that was decided back in 1969, but more importantly, how it references and impacts today in 2021.
Well, thank you, Steve, and it's such an honor to be with Mary Beth and John and everybody else. The Tinker case is still the leading case. It's the case. I think their late great fellow litigant Christopher Eckhart told me one time back in 1999 on the 30-year anniversary of it. He said it was the Brown versus Board of Education for student First Amendment rights, and I don't think that's hyperbole. It's one of the most significant constitutional law cases in American jurisprudence, and the language about requiring school officials to have a forecast of a substantial disruption. That's a standard that is used not only in K through 12 cases, but it's also used in college and university school cases. And what's so pleasing to me is that after years of the Supreme Court sort of giving little what's called Tinker carve-outs in the Brandy Levy case in Mahanoy Area School District versus BL, the United States Supreme Court breathed some life into that animating spirit of the Tinker decision, and emphasized that, you know, schools are, I think Justice Breyer wrote that they're nurseries of democracy and have a duty to protect unpopular speech. And so the Tinker case is alive and well, and it's still the leading standard. And people associate it with positivity.
Okay,
I
very good.
agree. I agree. I think it's a critically important case for even understanding constitutional law and the First Amendment itself, because it was such an interesting tension between school authority to run schools, which they have to have, and individual rights to for students to express themselves. And it is one of the most compelling tensions, and in this case is one of the most compelling cases for dealing with that tension. Because when you're a school teacher, school administrator, and you've got kids and you're worried about getting through the material and keeping a lid on anything that might get out of hand, it's tempting to overuse that authority, and it's kind of a microcosm of what governments are like, trying to make sure they keep a lid on things out there in the public, and they can get a little heavy-handed. And this, when it comes to speech and controlling speech, and we have a lot of issues right now with regard to misinformation speech, disinformation, and dangerously provocative speech. And I think there's a mood to some extent in the country to say, make those people stop. And this is a perfect kind of example of when the need for authority and the right to free speech collide, and how it should be worked out. And it tends to be worked out mostly in favor of speech, as it happened in the Tinker case. And I think that is a foundational lesson in how our democracy is supposed to work.
You know, and related to that, John, this is a question for both you, John, and Mary Beth. And as you look at the whole story of Tinker v. Des Moines, Mary Beth, let's start with you in terms of you know, take us back to 1965. Take us back to the whole story, and as Dan Weddle and I have talked about before, and with David Hudson, you know, the real story.
Well, there was an important thing that happened a couple of years before that. Well, there were a number of things that happened involving Black students speaking up against racism. And really, in many ways, you could say that the rights of students in public schools today in the United States grew out of the efforts of Black students speaking up about segregation and racism, because in the early 60s and 50s especially, but in 1963, the Birmingham Children's Crusade happened with about 2,000 Black kids marching and protesting in Birmingham, and they were attacked by police dogs and by Bull Connor, the chief of police. And then eventually, soon after that, that was in May of 1963, in September, right after the March on Washington that August, the Ku Klux Klan and the white supremacists bombed the headquarters of the Birmingham Children's Crusade, which was the 16th Street Baptist Church. And so in that, 4 little girls were murdered. Their bodies were found in the rubble of the church. And that was really our first experience with Black armbands. I'll show you the children, Cynthia, Addie Mae, Carol, and Denise. And they were in the church when it was bombed on September 15th, 1963, on their way from Sunday school to the main sanctuary. And so a call went out for people all over the country to wear black armbands, to mourn for the little girls. And that's exactly what we did in Des Moines. And John may have taken this picture, I'm not sure, but in the middle is me with my black armband, and then over to the right, Bonnie, my sister, and Hope, our little sister. And over to the left, Linda and Phyllis Griffin. Their mother had already won an Iowa Supreme Court case when she came back from World War II and was not allowed, she was a veteran, was not allowed to have a soda drink at the local drugstore. So their mother and our mother became friends. And so this was our us at the memorial service for the Birmingham children in 1963. And that was our first experience at wearing armbands. So that kind of, led to the experiences. And then also we were raised in the church. And so our father and our mother both believed in implementing their values from their faith. And so, when they saw something that was unjust, unfair, they thought that you should do something about it. So that had a huge effect on us. So that kind of all led up to the events of 1964 then, when students, again, Black students in Mississippi, protested the Ku Klux Klan murders of 3 civil rights workers, Cheney, Schwerner, and Andrew Goodman, that year in Mississippi. And so much of this had to do with voting rights, which is still, this issue still is with us today very much. And so these young people were pressing for the voting rights of African Americans in Mississippi, and they were murdered in 1964. And so when that happened, high school students in Mississippi at a Black high school wore buttons to school to protest the murders, and they were told that they could not do that. And so I'll show you the buttons that they wore. One man, one vote, SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And a case started working its way through the courts then. And that case was going to affect not only us, but all students in the United States today still, because they won their case at the appeals court in Mississippi, the Fifth Circuit, when the court said that they should have been allowed to wear those buttons. Why? Because they did not substantially disrupt school.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where that standard comes from. Now, I'm just going to briefly say that after that happened, our parents went to Mississippi that summer when the bodies were found of Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman. And they came home on my 12th birthday and told us what had happened. They didn't believe that you should just keep everything secret from kids, that they thought that kids needed to know what was going on in the world. And they taught us, and I think kids today want to know the truth of what's going on. But they came home and told us about that in 1964.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of that led up to that. Well, the same day the bodies were found off the coast of Vietnam in the Gulf of Tonkin, a US Navy ship claimed it was attacked, the USS Maddox. And so then the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was passed by Congress, signed by President Johnson within days. The war was already going on, but it was under the radar, and most Americans knew nothing about Vietnam. And most Americans probably still don't know a lot about Vietnam, although it has affected so many families with so many emotions. But all of that led up to then Christmas in 1965, when the war then was really escalating. And as our father would read the Bible to us about Mary and Joseph coming up from the city of David to the city of Galilee, and the promise of the little baby, the hope and the love, we didn't see that. We saw war.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it led up to that.
Sure, John. This is a good. I think that's a wonderful entree for you, if you will, to talk about going to Washington, doing the things that you did, and then also share with us as well. And Mary Beth has already mentioned it, but the involvement of your parents in all this as well.
Yes, I wanted to mention more about that. Getting back to the feel of 1965 is not so easy. 1965 is only 20 years after the end of World War II. It's 15 or less years after the Korean War. It's pretty much the Cold War was a major thing back then. People were talking about mutually assured destruction. Our parents were not really part of the mainstream in a sense. Our father was a Methodist minister, which sounds mainstream. But our mother was very aware of the dangers of the Cold War, of nuclear annihilation, of radiation poisoning that was going on in the atmosphere, I think, until 1963. We ate frozen eggs and powdered milk because our mother didn't want us to be exposed to strontium-90 and radioactive materials. Our father was a Methodist minister in a small town of Atlantic, Iowa. And in that town, there was one Black family, and the kids from that family were not permitted to use the swimming pool. So when our father found out about that, he brought the matter up with the town council, and they had to permit the kids to swim in the swimming pool, but they did not appreciate that our father raised that issue. And the church board likewise didn't want that sort of controversy in their church, and they didn't renew our father's contract. So he got appointed to another church in Des Moines, and our mother became involved in the civil rights movement in Des Moines with the NAACP, and we began to have Black friends. And so it was natural for us to invite our friends to come to church with us. And our father was also involved with the civil rights movement, and he made comments publicly in support of the civil rights movement. And the church there did not want to hear that either. And so he lost that job also. Well, the job that he got next was like a perfect job for our father. He became the Peace Education Secretary for the American Friends Service Committee, which is a Quaker organization. And in his role as Peace Education Secretary, he organized talks, symposia, and family camps, which were a wonderful thing in the summer, where the families from around the country would come together for a week, and they'd hear from experts in international affairs. It really was a wonderful educational thing, but also a cultural experience for us. I feel like we were raised in the movement, both the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement. The nights around the campfire singing songs, If I Had a Hammer, and any number of wonderful songs, not just protest songs, but songs of the heart. We were raised in that. And so when 1965 came, with the Rolling Thunder campaign of the bombing of Vietnam with the B-52s, it was natural for us to be opposed to the war. And we had a lot of community within the peace community. We had a lot of support for that. So in 1965, our father helped to organize 2 charter buses that went from Iowa to Washington, D.C. to participate in really the first large anti-war demonstration in Washington, anti-Vietnam War demonstration. And the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom also was part of the coalition that put that together. And Maggie Eckhart, Chris Eckhart's mother, and our mother were both members of the Women's International League. So they were going. And so I asked if I could go on that trip. And also Chris Eckhart asked if he could go. And we both got permission to go. So we went to Washington. We had a wonderful demonstration surrounded by thousands and thousands of people that basically agreed with our perspective on the war. And then on the way back, there was a discussion on the charter bus. There were two of these buses. On our bus, there was discussion what we could do to continue to try to raise awareness of the war. And one of the men on the bus had heard that people were planning to wear black armbands. And so he just presented that idea to the bus. And as Mary Beth said, we were familiar with black armbands from earlier in the civil rights movement. Basically, everybody thought it was a great idea. And at the next rest stop, we shared that idea with the other bus. And when we got back to Des Moines, the adult and the college people had meetings, and the high school people had meetings. And Chris and I both belonged to a Unitarian youth group. And we took that idea to our youth group along with Bruce Clark and Ross Peterson were also high school students that had gone on that trip to Washington. And we all belonged to the Unitarian youth group. So we had basically the whole Unitarian youth group was with us and ready to wear armbands. Ross Peterson wrote an article for his school newspaper at Roosevelt High School in Des Moines, explaining what we were doing, that we were wearing the armbands to mourn the deaths on both sides of the conflict and to urge the adoption of Robert Kennedy's call for a Christmas truce that year. We felt that if we could have a truce, that maybe it would be difficult to restart the conflict after that. We were maybe naive, but that's how we thought, and that was one of the reasons that we were articulating that we were going to wear the armband. Well, when Ross wrote his article for the school newspaper, the faculty advisor was shocked, I guess, and he took it to the school principal in Roosevelt, and that principal got on the phone with the other principals in Des Moines, and the principals decided not to allow the wearing of the armbands. So 0 hour arrived. I was carrying the Des Moines Register. I was a newspaper boy. And I'm walking around the streets and I'm thinking, now the armbands have been prohibited, and we're going to walk into the lion's den, basically. And from civil rights training that I had been involved in, that it stressed the need to be together as a group, to talk about what might happen and to maintain your unity as a group. And I thought, well, we've got this conflict arising and we haven't talked about it. We should hold off until we have a chance to talk about it. Well, unfortunately, Mary Beth had already gone to school. And when I got a hold of Chris Eckhart on the phone, he said, I don't care, I'm going to wear it anyway. And the other students agreed to hold off. So Chris and Mary Beth got kicked out of school that day. And we had a meeting then at Chris Eckhart's house. And we tried to call the school board. We wanted to talk to the president of the school board and explain to him that we were not planning to do anything disruptive. We were just wearing these black pieces of cloth on our sleeve. But we were told that he was too busy and if we wanted to argue about it, we could take it to the school board meeting in January.
John, for a second,
Well,
you mentioned the black armband, and everyone has seen the photo. That there was a photograph taken with both you and Mary Beth wearing the black armband that had the peace symbol. But the black armband that you actually wore was just a black armband with no markings, correct?
Yeah, it was just a plain black piece of cloth. And
Right.
anyway, so we wore the armbands. The rest of us then wore armbands and got kicked out. Also, we had a community meeting of not just the students, but also the parents and other interested peace people. And the lawyer for the Iowa Civil Liberties Union, we called him on the phone, and he advised us that he thought we did have a First Amendment argument to be made in the federal court, and that he would advise that we go back to school without the armbands on so that we wouldn't complicate the issue with truancy issues on top of it.
Mhm.
And so we had a plan. That's what we did. We went back to school. Mary Beth and I wore black clothes, at least for a while. I wore them the rest of the school year, and everyone at school knew what those black clothes
Sure.
meant. And anyway, so that the rest is history.
Yeah. David Hudson, Dan Weddle, questions, comments from your perspectives as law professors, where you and for those who are viewing this either live or will view it on tape. By the way, this is the first of our symposia events that we'll be doing, and it's obvious that we're starting with the most important landmark court case dealing with First Amendment rights of students. But David, Daniel, questions, comments, anything you want to pose to John and Mary Beth?
Thought I might ask about the lawyers. You mentioned that I think some of the lawyers were maybe Craig Sawyer with the Iowa ACLU, and then Dan Johnston, who I think argued the case on your behalf before the Supreme Court. Do you recall much interaction with them? I know that thanks to Dan and Steve, I think Dan came in 2013 at that historic UMKC event.
That is correct. I didn't know Craig Sawyer. You're correct. He was the lawyer for the Iowa Civil Liberties Union, and it was from him that we received the advice to go back to school without the armbands on and to sue in the federal court. But Dan Johnston, we did interact with. He interviewed us preparing for the trial, and over the years, he became quite a good friend. We've given a number of presentations where Dan was present. Really a great guy, and a wonderful lawyer. He used to joke that he was still in his 20s, in his late 20s, when he won at the Supreme Court. You correct me if I'm wrong. It may be in his 20s when he argued it, but he was young, and he always joked about he started off with the climax sort of. But yeah, what a great guy.
Yeah, that's a great picture. Dan Johnston was such a warm-hearted man, all about justice. He said often in his later years that he was fighting for justice for others his whole life, but that he felt so often, especially in his younger years, that he couldn't fight for justice for himself as a gay man. And when he talked about that, it would often bring him to tears. He was a person with a big heart, and that really helped a lot as young plaintiffs for us, because by this time we were a little bit traumatized by all of the hate mail and the threats to us, and the people throwing red paint at our house, people threatening to kill our father. And so, a lawyer like Dan Johnston was really more than just a legal mind. He was also it was just very comforting to be with him, and to know that he cared. And he came up with some really great legal arguments. I mean, his argument about viewpoint discrimination really helped to win the case, because the school system had allowed black armbands if you were mourning for the death of school spirit, like not enough kids coming to the football game. Oh, you could wear a black armband for that. That would be okay. But when it came to us, talking about, being sad about real people killed in war, then, oh, no, that wasn't going to be allowed. So that was one of Dan Johnston's main arguments, and he was very good at it.
I remember after the trial court appearance where we actually testified, we were in the car getting ready to go, and Dan came out to say goodbye to us, and our mother was very upset with him. He had argued, he had made a great First Amendment argument, and she wanted him to argue that the war in Vietnam was illegal. And she wanted to cut right to the chase on that and argue against the war, which it raises the point that we were not First Amendment activists back then. We were anti-war, we were peace activists, and we were using the First Amendment to make our point. It was a tool in our hands. Now we are First Amendment activists, but I know Mary Beth is also an anti-war and a peace activist. But anyway, our mother was very upset with him, with Dan, because he didn't argue that the war was illegal. Anyway, that is a picture of our mother, as well as a picture of Dan, because Dan understood that was not a winning argument.
Well, there were also some of the students who wore the armbands, like Bruce Clark, who was suspended, who was one of the leaders of the action. He also was very adamant that the argument in the court case should be about the war. And that's one reason why he didn't become a plaintiff.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. He didn't want to dilute, I guess, the anti-war movement with the First Amendment issue. Anyway, that's exactly what he said. I mean, when I talked to him about 10 years ago about that, I thought that he had not participated in the lawsuit because he was worried about his father's employment. And I raised that to him, and he said, no, that wasn't it. It was that he didn't want to make a First Amendment case when he thought it should be an anti-war case.
It's interesting that client goals don't always align with the actual legal position that could be successful. I mean, it's not as though that court could have issued a ruling saying that the war is illegal and everybody has to come home. But the goal was, of course, to make it as public as possible if that war shouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
But that's, the court's not the way you're going to be able to go about that. And Dan realized there was a huge constitutional question there. And I don't remember talking to Dan about this, so you may know. I mean, did he envision this thing going any further than the trial court? Did he imagine it could reach the Supreme Court?
Well, he knew about the Burnside case, which I didn't realize till years later, which was the Mississippi students who were protesting, the murders of Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman. He knew that case was in the works because I've seen a letter, I think, that he wrote to our parents. And actually, our parents knew about the case then, because when our dad, I saw a letter recently where he's seeking support to go ahead and advance the case to the appeals level. This is after we lost at the district level. And he said, that there is this case in Mississippi that's giving some hope where students had a free speech right. And he said, but we're going to need to raise some money because to go to the appeals court, it's going to cost $500. So we better start raising some money to get that. But it seems like a pretty low amount now. But yeah, there's a Dan Johnston photo. That's great.
Yeah, $500 back then was some serious change. When he came in this last time, when we all met in person, I called him and asked him if he could come do this. He was living and practicing in New York, so it was a significant travel expense. And he said, "Well," I said, "we'll cover your expenses. Would you like an honorarium or something? What would you need to be able to come in?" He said, if you'll fly me in and take me to Bryant's Barbecue. And so that's what we did. We went to Bryant's Barbecue because he and his partner used to come to the plaza in Kansas City once in a while down from Des Moines, and they would wander around the plaza and end up at Bryant's at some point. So that did. We have to stop and take a 10-minute break.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. And by the way, the reason why we're doing that because of the continuing legal education units, that it's a 50-minute segment and then a 10-minute break. We want to make sure that we follow the guidelines. We're discussing the landmark U.S. Supreme Court case of Tinker versus Des Moines, decided in February of 1969. I'm Steve Brown, co-moderator and also executive director and board member of the John F. Tinker Foundation. Our guests today, John Tinker, Mary Beth Tinker, Daniel Weddle, David Hudson, and of course, everyone who's watching. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. So everyone just relax and we'll be back very soon. I'm Steve Brown, Executive Director of the John F. Tinker Foundation. What you're seeing on the screen now is the question for this first hour. This is a polling question that you will submit for your continuing legal education units. Thank you so much.
The war is raging. Johnny has to fight. I want to be with him from morning till night. I want to be with him. It grieves my heart so. Won't you let me go with you? No, my love, no. Tomorrow is Sunday. Monday is the day that your captain will call you, and you must obey. Your captain will call you. It grieves my heart so. Won't you let me go with you? No, my love, no. I'll tie back my hair, men's clothing I'll put
listen to me. Oh, I despise, 'cause it means destruction of innocent lives. War means tears to thousands of mothers die when their sons go out to fight and lose their lives. I said war. Good God, y'all. What is it good for? Absolutely. Get said again. Oh, Lord. What is it good for? Absolutely. Nothing. Listen to me. It ain't nothing but a heartbreak. Friend only to the undertaker. To all men. The thought of war blows my mind. War has caused unrest within the younger generation. Induction, then destruction. Who wants to die? Oh, war. Good God, y'all. What is it good for? Absolutely. Said. War. Oh, yeah. What is it good for? Absolutely. Nothing. Listen to me. It ain't nothing but a heartbreaker. Got one friend, that's the undertaker. Has shattered many young men's dreams. Made him disabled, Billy and me. Life is much too short and precious to spend fighting wars each day. War can't give life, it can only take it away. Oh, war! Good God, y'all. What is it good for? Absolutely. Nothing. Say it again. War. Oh, Lord. What is it good for? Absolutely. Nothing. Listen to me.